contrary, where it is in fact wild card weekend. So it's going to get extra wild and extra contrarian, because that's the way we're going to win you money for the tournaments here that are going across all the industries, all the sites. I'm Chris Spags, joined once again, returning from his little Mexican sabbatical. You didn't wear any fun, colorful attire here, so I guess that's probably better for us to not get in trouble. Welcome back, Alex Baker, better known as Osmo. How are you doing, Alex? How's the time off?
I'm doing well. I had a ton of FOMO that I missed week 17. I did a single entry in each contest, but man, I had a little bit less FOMO once I saw the results. So I think I might have dodged a bullet there. But wild card weekend, a little bit more predictable than week 17. So looking forward to jumping right back in head first.
You missed the emergence of Brashad Perriman, top receiver in the NFL, which was really one of the highlights, I think, of my NFL DFS career, which just
jumping right back in.
Exactly. Yes. You get right back in there. But, and of course, we are joined once again in our Tournament of Champions here as we're doing down the stretch run here of On the Contrary, welcoming back Brian Hooper, better known as Brick 75 and all the tournaments out there. How you doing, Brian? Welcome back.
Good. How you doing?
We're excited to have you on board. And Brian, real fast, wanted to talk because I know you are doing a little more work on YouTube. You also are a top 10 DFS player across most of the sports. Hopefully I'm not overselling, but you are still one of the top players out there. So how was your NFL season? Because we're going to talk about one thing in a second. Apparently the season didn't go so well for some people, but just you, how did you do? Any lessons you learned? Anything you picked up across the NFL this year?
Maybe a few lessons. I constantly change my strategy. So I'm always picking something up. But NFL is strange where, you would think it should be easier than it is because so many people play it. But it's extremely sharp. At least the last couple of years. So it's tough. And on some sites I've won. I play all four of the major ones. On Fantasy Draft I crushed. Knock on wood. On DraftKings though. On DraftKings, I started the season out strong and nosedived probably about midway through the season. So hopefully this wild card and playoff run goes well for me on DK.
Hopefully for all of us, Brian. But one thing I wanted to mention real fast, you are doing some work on YouTube now. You're starting to put more video content out there, which has been a move. A lot of the top players out there, people enjoy the insights you guys have. How can people follow you on YouTube and what kind of content are you putting out on your channel?
Yeah, I haven't done anything for a few weeks because the
this one's the hard part, Brian. It's hard to do this every day.
Right? Yeah, but I mean, I'm just doing it for fun, really, and throwing some ideas out there whenever someone mentions something that I find I want to comment on. And right now it's DFS, but I might just put up something else. Who knows? Too on there, but I'm going to try to put out a couple more this week now the holidays are over.
Yeah, so check out Brian's YouTube channel. I think they can search Brick75 or Brian Hooper to find you on there. It should come up. You'll see Brian's logo.
Twitter has it's pretty easy to find.
Yeah, so go follow Brian Hooper with 2 underscores at the end on Twitter if you want to see the videos, or just search it on YouTube. YouTube's pretty smart about servicing those things. So one thing I wanted to ask both you guys, we talked about it briefly before we came on the air, so you guys can sanitize it as you need to now that we're talking about it. But there was a tweet which a few people sent me on Twitter, which did go fairly viral. One of the top players in DFS, or I guess a guy who's on the cusp of being one of the top players. I don't know how you guys want to or would quantify it, but the real Ricky D on Twitter. I'm going to post the link in the YouTube chat right now just so people can see it if they want, because we are a full disclosure site. But he posted his graph of NFL earnings, I guess you could say, over the course of the season. Went from winning 600 grand to losing roughly 400 grand by the end of the year. He talked about I guess I probably should just read the tweet, but he said, my 2019 NFL is not fun. This is the reality of DFS. It's such an isolating sadness factor when you are losing since nobody really cares or understands. I care, Ricky. Much respect for people that endure these swings without permanent emotional scars. I fear the worst for my long-term psyche. So that's a tough one. Alex, I'm going to laugh because I'm uncomfortable and ask you, how do you feel about that? What's your perspective as a player who's also investing large chunks of money? You have these swings, but for the most part, you're leveling out, or theoretically, I would assume, coming on ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is all about bankroll management because you can't lose $1 million without wagering a lot every single week. And in general, I recommend, you start off with like the smallest buy-in tournaments you can play in, or single entries, beginner tournaments as well. and you kind of work your way up based on your bankroll. But to be honest, like there's not a lot of money in higher stakes games where a lot of these swings happen. The ROIs are a lot lower than you can get at lower stakes, and you can actually make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just playing contests under $20. So I think it's important to realize that these high stakes games are a lot of times more trouble than they're worth. I mean, I play them because I want to be ranked highly in the industry, but the swings are a consequence of playing contests that high. And if you look at my graph that I posted in my 5 Secrets of DFS article, I also in 2019 had a swing of $1 million down, and I had enough bankroll to keep going, and I worked my way back, and I had my best year yet. So that's just what it's like, kind of like playing these highest stakes.
Yeah, and we've talked about it a lot. And you've done it, Alex. I think to your credit, not just to pump your tires, but you've done a really good job emphasizing the importance of bankroll management. A lot of the articles you've done, a lot of the game plan articles we have on the site, which you can check out right now on the top tab at awesemo.com. But the importance of bankroll management, maxing out tournaments that you can afford, staying within those guidelines. We've had guys who've won from some of the sports we've done who've talked about it. One guy in particular, I'll shout him out, Gene Kim, is one of our regulars. I think we've all gotten tweets from him. He started in the Four Corners videos and then won some money, ended up watching a lot more of our content using the projections, won some money, then decided he's just going to keep playing within his bankroll, keep playing smart, even though he's on a hot hand. And that is the way to handle it. But Brian, do you have any thoughts here? Because you're also a top player. You're spending a lot of money out there as well. Another smart player too. So how do you feel about Ricky Sweet? And I guess, if you want to address the mental aspects of it too, that's certainly a thing we can talk about, honestly.
Well, I've never lost, so I wouldn't understand.
I can tell just looking at you, you just smell like money through the screen.
Yeah, no idea. What a loser. No, I've had similar swings. A couple years ago, I think the end of football season, I think I lost 600,000 in like 3 months, something like that. I used to be a poker player for a living, and the swings there I thought were bad. They're not nearly as bad as DFS. DFS, it's like a PLO is Pot Limit Omaha is a really swingy game in poker. It's not even close to DFS, especially tournament, high buy-in tournament swings. So you need a monster bankroll to play in these higher level games, and you really never know where you stand. It's strange, right? New guys come, old guys go, new guys come up, strategies change, and you could fall behind quick. So it's tough to even recommend like play 10% of your bankroll or 15% of your bankroll, because you might be a dog and you should play none. Or you might be a favorite, or like Alex said, depends on the stakes. Depends on the stakes you're playing. Anything under $20 though, I think you should still be able to get a pretty significant edge. And the higher ones, you're going to have to compete with the best players in the world. So, you really want to consider, it's easier. It seems easier to win because there's only 600 players in the event, at the $500 or more. But you'll notice this all the time, where if you enter the same lineup into a cheaper buy-in event, you can cash in that one and you won't cash in the bigger one a lot. More often than you think, and your return on investment is really important. So your equity in what you get back. So like it's not just boom or bust. It's not just I need first and I don't care. It's like, yeah, you want first, but you also need to get back a significant portion of what you invest. Otherwise, you're going to go broke really fast.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we try to be honest here. I think Ship My Money, another guy on the channel, has talked a lot about the swings that he goes through. We've seen him take down some giant tournaments. We've seen him have talk about some of the losses he's had for extended periods of time. I think that's just the nature of the beast. So you got to keep it honest. And I feel like this tweet was one worth hitting on. So I'm glad we can get your guys' feedback. I appreciate it. I know never fun to discuss losing, but I'm glad that both of you can never claim an L in your lives, I'm sure. And also, as Brian mentioned earlier, fantasy draft, a great place to win too. It's going to be easier to win on there because not only because they're the presenting sponsor of this show and many of our other shows here on this YouTube channel, but also because they are not charging you rake. That's a big part of sustaining bankroll, And if you want to approach DFS in a smart way, not paying rake is a big part of how you stay profitable. You can do that at fantasydraft.com, where all of the contest entry fees go right to the winners. So go to fantasydraft.com right now and use the promo code AWESEMO for your free 7-day trial over there. And Alex, one last time here, we had a full NFL season long. How many wings do you think you could have bought with that if you hadn't paid rake on all the other sites?
I think that if you took all of your money that you played in DFS and you played on Fantasy Draft instead of any other site, you'd have enough wings at the end of the year to sustain yourself for the full year. So if you just want to go on the Atkins diet and just only eat wings, then you want to play on Fantasy Draft.
I think the wings might be breaded, so you'd have to go. So it would not be Atkins friendly, but I guess we don't need to talk about that. But yes, go check out Fantasy Draft. Go store up your wings for the season, much like a bear in hibernation. You want to be ready to go, so go check out fantasydraft.com right now. All right, guys, we got a wild card slate here, and the first game that we get to hit on, I will say, brings me great joy. Buffalo at Houston. Houston's defense, arguably the weakest on the slate, with a 383 yards per game they allow, while Buffalo's is one of the strongest. Also, Houston getting J.J. Watt back in there. We'll see how much of a snap count he gets, but after being told that he was going to miss the season, he's back in there because he is a monster of a human being. But the most important question here, and I'm going to ask you, Alex, first, is Josh Allen in play in the playoffs? The most Josh Allen-y situation possible, but I think he can throw on these guys, Alex. So what do you think about Josh Allen's prospects here in this spot and the potential of a Buffalo stack?
I mean, I think that he's definitely playable. As far as passers go on the slate, he might be slightly better than Tom Brady, so that he has that going for him. At this point in his career, Houston is about an average D, a little bit worse than average, so that's a positive factor, where some of the defenses on the slate are a little bit better. But there's the baseline that he's starting from of throwing less than 7 yards per attempt is pretty low. He does rush to compensate for that, but definitely not my favorite play of the week. How about you guys?
Ryan, how are you feeling? Are you more pro Josh Allen? Because I just want somebody to share in my enthusiasm for the fact that we are now getting Josh Allen in the playoffs, which is going to offer a big opportunity one way or another.
Is the 7% count is
that's half the field, so that's, you're on the team, you're on the train, maybe somewhere in the back.
Somewhere around there, probably. It looks like there's still more information to come, right? But right now, around there, not totally going over the field with Josh.
Okay, so I guess let's assume then for that 7% of lineups, Brian, who would be the guys you'd want to stack the most? The obvious target, John Brown, but Cole Beasley's been in the mix as well. I do think, in the past we've talked about Josh Allen, why he's not an ideal fantasy quarterback, because he doesn't, doesn't pass well, doesn't pass enough sometimes, but he does have two defined receivers now who are his top two targets. So if you're going to stack anybody on Buffalo with Allen, would it be Brown and Beasley, Brian, or would it be somebody else?
Yep, Beasley, Brown, and then Knox.
Okay.
Knox probably wouldn't be like a group stack. It would be, if it happens, I'd let it happen in my crunches.
Okay.
But I would try to force him in.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy on Osmo's projections doesn't seem like a priority. But Alex, I know you're not as bullish on Josh Allen despite the enthusiasm I brought to the equation. But how would you go John Brown here? Are you inclined for the receivers at all for Buffalo, even if they were without Josh Allen?
Yeah, the one thing I like about the Buffalo stack is that they don't spread it around too much. It's mostly Brown and Beasley. Knox does not get a lot of targets. So I think that makes it pretty easy to stack. You just pick either Brown, Beasley, or both, and you have a lot of correlation going for you. Pretty good matchup. And I think that could definitely work.
Yeah, so that's, I'm into the Allen stack. We felt like we had to hit that up front, but a player that may be more popular and probably more logically so is Devin Singletary. He's gotten a lot of work, between 20 and 25 touches down the stretch of the year, going against Houston's defense, which not too great versus the run in terms of the yardage they allowing over 121 rushing yards per game, but still maybe a little better than they seem. They do stiffen up in the red zone. They'll give up a ton of rushing touchdowns. Alex, where do you shake out with Devin Singletary at a price point that's pretty reasonable? And I think your projection for him also seems not the worst on the slate for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that he's the workhorse back now. They have shown that down the stretch they really went away from Frank Gore. And Singletary He was injured to start the season, but now he's the man. So on a team that runs the ball a good amount of the time, and also he gets a decent amount of targets, he's going to stand out as a pretty good option this week.
Brian, how are you feeling here about Singletary in the spot where he has been getting the work? As Alex mentioned, he is a workhorse back, and it seems unlikely that Frank Gore rises from the dead for the playoffs.
Yeah, I played him a lot during the season, and so I have to keep losing money on him. So I'm gonna probably have like 30, 35, somewhere around there, depending on some of the injury news.
All right, that makes sense. How about Houston's side here? Because Houston's passing attack has been a popular stack throughout the year. I know, Alex, they've always projected pretty well for you. Will Fuller expected to be back in the mix this week? Still banged up, still certainly a risk to go out again, I would guess. They're going against a bad matchup for them against Buffalo's pass defense. One of the better graded coverage groups according to PFF, also giving up under 200 passing yards a game. So, Alex, how do you feel about the Houston stack here, where these guys are going to be pretty decently owned despite the tough matchup? And I guess you think they'll find success against the Buffalo team, who's shut down a lot of passing game opponents throughout the year?
So I think the latest on Fuller that I saw was he's not expected to play this week, which makes me more excited about Hopkins for sure, and also Stills. There's some sort of narrative in the industry that Stills plays better when Fuller is in the mix. I just don't buy into that at all. But then Kiki Kuti, we saw a couple of weeks ago when Fuller was out. Kuti played a significant amount in a game where they have to run out a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. Maybe if you have Singletary, then Kuti maybe could be a contrarian option this week.
Brian, how are you feeling here about the pass game for Houston? Are you with it? Do you think that there's opportunity for these guys to go around, or are you maybe more afraid of the Buffalo matchup than Alex might be?
No, I like it. I like Stills and Hopkins. I'll continue the theme of wasting money on Stills like I did Singletary. So let's see how that goes. And yeah, maybe a few cuties too. I agree with Alex. Are we only talking about the passing game here? Because Duke Johnson, he's not like super correlated. He's less correlated, I think, than people think he is in the passing game. But I'm probably gonna throw some darts on him too.
Yeah, the run game we can talk about, because I find Carlos Hyde to be an intriguing play just because, we are going to have ownership on Watson. We are going to have ownership on Hopkins. I know you guys are bullish on the passing attack, but it is playoff football, and Buffalo has been susceptible to the run on the year. And Houston has shown a willingness to just keep going back to Carlos Hyde and to feed him there. I think that Hyde has some potential here, and he's going to go overlooked. I know he's not the most exciting PPR option because he's not the most involved in the pass game, but still a guy who can vulture some touchdowns, can get 20 touches a game. Alex, how are you feeling about Hyde at all here? Because he doesn't project too well for you, but the ownership very low for a slate of this size.
So any first running back is going to look a little worse when it comes to playoffs, just because there aren't those lopsided matchups that we're accustomed to. This one's supposed to be pretty competitive, so anyone's guess whether Hyde or Johnson will be the one to get more of the work than normal this week. But Hyde, it looks like the prices really aren't that great on him across the industry. On Fantasy Draft, 9,600, DraftKings, especially high at 5,100. And Duke Johnson isn't getting enough work to really pop out as far as value. So I'm just fine taking a pass on the Houston running backs this week.
Brian, I guess to close the loop fully on this game here, would you have any Hyde interest given that you are maybe flirting a little bit with Duke Johnson and being in your lineups?
Yeah, well, I have him at almost 70 yards rushing projected right now, and that's not the problem. The problem is he's kind of highly owned for Carlos Hyde too. 16, 20% right now, something like that, and that's been and that's holding him back in my projections. So, yeah, sure, he could. I don't know. Are you gonna, do you want to be above the field on that? Do you want 35, 45% Hyde? Because that's what you're gonna need, right, to get over that. And I don't know, it's a little too high for me unless things change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess when you are adjusting for the slate, the 16% doesn't seem that high because it is a 4-gamer. But I guess to get above the field, you really would have to make an investment in Carlos Hyde, and that could be a tough situation. So that's a good insight from Brian there and how a player would think, a pro player would think about this stuff. Let's keep going through here, unless there's anybody else in this game that we haven't touched on, Alex or Brian, that you guys feel like are worth mentioning. One of the
Alex,
tight
you
ends.
like Duke? Do you like my guy Duke?
Are we talking about football still? Because if so, then no.
So tough for Duke Johnson. Look, Brian, you gave me some love for Josh Allen. So I'll say I'm tepidly interested in Duke Johnson for you.
Okay. All right.
It's all about supporting each other here on the show. Let's keep going through to the other Saturday game, a conference split day where the Saturday games will both be the AFC games. So we'll know who's going to that next round there. But we have Tennessee getting 19.8 implied points heading into New England, a 5-point favorite. Total came up a little bit today from yesterday. Ryan Tannehill going to be completely overlooked. It looks like A.J. Brown as well going to be overlooked going against this New England defense, who's been really good against the pass all year until they met Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then things turned south for them. Derrick Henry also not looking too highly owned. People apparently afraid of paying that price. It's a New England defense that, again, has been good, though, susceptible to the run at times throughout the year. And New England side, we know what they do. They spread the ball around. There's lots of ways that can go. So I guess the question here, Alex, I'll ask you first. Tennessee's pass game, run game, any of this jump out to you as being appealing despite the low total here? Because it just seems like the Vegas total is assuming that people are just going to think that New England wins and does what they do every time the playoffs roll around.
Well, this is interesting to me because if you just go off of the body of work that Ryan Tannehill has done this year, he's by far the most effective quarterback in the league. Over 9.5 yards per attempt. That's more than a yard over anyone else about. Maybe I don't think anyone's above 9 at least. And that it was a smaller than normal sample because Mariota started a decent amount. But that is a huge reason for confidence, I'd say. New England's pass D is probably the best in the league, which mitigates my interest in Tannehill to some extent. But I still think that he's very viable, and I think he might be the lowest owned compared to where I think he should be this week of any quarterback.
Brian, do you share that kind of love, or at least interest, a peaking of interest for Ryan Tannehill in the spot here where people really probably won't go on them because of the low total and the fear of that New England pass defense?
Yeah, I'm not getting to him right now. But that does, what Alex says does make me think, but it might just be New England's D that's pushing these projections down because they are all pretty darn low owned except for Corey Davis. I do like Juno Smith, just as a one-off tight end. You ever seen that guy run?
He's a beast. He's like 6'5", and he runs very fast.
He's an animal. And from my scouting training that I've talked about, it's all about the jaw and the running gait. So
what's his 40 time?
He's an elite spark athlete, but as Brian mentioned last time, of course, that is the jaw is all that matters in any sort of athlete. I guess the Jonnu Smith thing is an option. A.J. Brown going to be completely overlooked. It looks like 10%, under 10% projected ownership for him right now. Brian, would you be willing to go there to A.J. Brown at all, or is the price just unappealing to you given that he's going against New England?
He's a bigger beast than Smith too. That A.J. Brown, God, for a wide receiver. But I'm only getting 6% right now. But yeah, go ahead.
He's one of those guys. We've seen New England struggle with guys like Devontae Parker this year, who are just, he's definitely not as much of a freak of nature size-wise, but he is like an elite, rangy, fast guy who does create separation well. I do think A.J. Brown has some potential here. And Alex, you have the tepid interest in Tannehill, or maybe a little more than tepid. Is Brown the guy you'd want to stack with him, or do you want to go to Jonnu Smith? Who would be the guys you would stack with Tannehill if you're going to go there?
Yeah, the tough thing here is that A.J. Brown is priced way up. So that makes it kind of tough to afford when compared to other guys like Michael Thomas and Hopkins. He's really going to pale in comparison because Tennessee's projected to not have very many touchdowns, and also he doesn't get targeted as much as those guys. So maybe more of a spend up to be contrarian in the spot here. Since it is a 4-game slate, I might consider doing that. Corey Davis is the much more natural option to pair with Tannehill here. Corey Davis has had really, really bad results over the past few weeks, which will drive down the ownership on him. And all the other factors are looking good. His playing time, his targets, just hasn't really put it together in one game. So I think that he makes a nice play.
Yeah, I think that all checks out. Let's talk about Derrick Henry too, and also Eddie, our lovable tech engineer our CTO, I guess, in the background of the YouTube chat right now, asking if we wanted an ownership update. We'll have one after the show because I don't want one now because it might change everything we're going to talk about. But I appreciate it, Eddie. Just wanted to shout out Eddie. Eddie's always working hard behind the scenes on the ownership projections.
What if it makes us like Josh Allen more? Now, do you want it?
Man. If Josh Allen went down, Eddie, if Josh Allen's down to 5%, then give us the update. Otherwise, we're good. Derrick Henry, though, he's right now projected for 15% ownership, pretty much flat. And he is another freak of nature player. Tennessee really loading up on the beasts of prey out there going against New England. And New England very competent, but athletically, you can definitely make an argument they're not the most athletically sound across the board. So Derrick Henry, Brian, is he somebody you would get to at all? As Alex mentioned, it is a playoff environment, going to be competitive. So maybe running backs have less value. But do you see any opportunity for Henry where people just won't go there because he's not the most logical PPR back in this playoff situation?
Yeah, I want to say he's kind of going to be a big fade for me, but his ownership, I think 15% is a little low. I think it'll be more like 20. But and once he goes 20, I think I'll have none. And obviously he's Derrick Henry. He could go off for 35, but right now I'm going with a fade on him.
Okay. Oh man, Alex, would you err more on the side of a fade, or would you go just like match the field just in case Derrick Henry does outrageous things?
I mean, this is all about the price for me, because he's been so insanely good. He's the most expensive option this week, depending on the site, and so we know that guys like Cook, Kamara, those two guys, they get targeted a lot more, and they're on teams that are. Well, at least Kamara's on the highest projected team total of the week. Cook, a little bit tougher matchup versus New Orleans, but he's a higher average player on the season. So I think that Cook would probably be my favorite, just because I feel like there's some factors that we'll get into later. But Henry's probably off the radar for me.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Let's talk the New England side here, where they're implied for 24.8 points. And Tom Brady has been getting some better protection down the stretch, which has helped him out. Also created some more room for Sony Michele. And if we recall last year, Sony Michele was really relied on in the playoffs, ended up averaging 24.8 fantasy points down to 3 games that they played here. This year, they have an extra game. So the expectation, I would think, is that Sony Michele continues to get that work that he's been getting down the last few weeks of the NFL season. But also James White is very much involved. Last year in the playoffs too, he saw one of his highest targeted years of his entire campaign at 17 targets in a game in one of their playoff games last year. So Brian, I'll ask you first here. New England side, what guys appeal to you here? I guess the running backs first. Would you want more Michele, want more White? Because it looks like Michelle's going to be higher owned right now, but White, we know the passing game work is going to be more valuable for what we try to do.
Yeah, I sound like a broken drum at this point, but I'm fading White and under the field on Sony.
What? Any particular reason why? Just because the ownership is high enough for these guys that you don't see the upside?
Yeah, I guess the answer to that every time is just through my model and how the way I go about it. But so like price, ownership, and my projections,
Gotcha.
in combination with all the other players and the groupings and settings I put together. I'm only getting Sony for 13% and James White for 1%. So one lineup. I mean, James White, especially in the playoffs, right? Like he's a guy who could go off for you. And this week I'm not, his correlation is lower than I've had in the past few weeks. Maybe that's with Burkhead and being possibly being projected to play here too. I don't know why that's any different, but and obviously my model takes into touchdowns into account and everything. So right now, no White, no Michele, or little amount on the field.
Alex, how are you feeling? Are you on the same page here? Do you think these guys may be a bit overvalued because of us, maybe hearkening back to what we saw last year, just thinking that White can do more because we've seen him do it? Is there any credibility? I mean, there's obviously credibility what Brian's saying, but are you on the same page?
I think White is one of my preferred options this week, so I'm glad to have a chance to be contrary here. We've seen that whenever New England needs to put up points, White's the guy that's on the field. Michele is more of a game flow back. So if they're up a lot, Michelle will get a lot of the work. So I think that the matchup versus Tennessee, where it's supposed to be more competitive than most New England games, gives me optimism that White will play more than average, and because he gets the PPR points, he scores a lot more fantasy points on average than the other guys. So I think that he's going to be an option that I'm going to lean on this week.
And it's worth noting, just real fast, to, I guess, make the argument against Sony Michele. The Tennessee defense, even though they have given up some decent games on the year, especially down the stretch here, the run defense grade from PFF is 88, which is one of the better marks in the league, only giving up 4 yards per rush. So it's going to be tough sledding for Sony Michele. And I think I would err on the side of liking James White more as well.
I should mention something really quick. Sanders was ruled in by RotoWorld's Twitter account like 10 minutes ago before the show started.
Yep.
And I did have that in my model, and I'm getting a lot of them. But I'm assuming his ownership will go up. But the reason I'm bringing that up now is because that's going to affect ownership. It's going to affect ownership on all these guys, right? And we've been talking about running backs that I'm fading. Well, that's going to happen when your personal ownership moves to another player.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's, again, another window into the insight and how a guy like Brian's managing his portfolio of lamps, which is how we advocate treating it like a stock portfolio. So, Brian, you're not going to the run game, at least right now. The pass game, is that appealing to you at all here with Tom Brady throwing to a guy like Julian Edelman, who's been pretty banged up down the stretch? We also have N'Keal Harry in the mix, who was pretty well targeted last week. Mohamed Sanu also involved. There's so many ways that this can break. So, and Philip Dorsett, too, who had some pretty good targets last week. What are you doing with New England's pass game, if anything?
Yeah, we should pour one out for play draft, right? The season long, my N'Keal Harry pick that went so horribly wrong. I had him like 30% of my best balls. I'm gonna have him most likely, and Edelman, and just a little bit of Sanu.
Okay, Alex, how do you feel about these wide receivers here? Do you like Edelman? Are you willing to go there, given the fact that he's, I would say, looked like a shell of himself here down the stretch, but that could certainly change with the playoffs? Or you willing to go to a younger guy like Harry or a guy in Sanu who they haven't shown the most willingness to trust fully?
I'm the most interested in Sanu. I think that he has a horrible game log, which will drive the ownership way down. And he's on the field the second most of the wide receivers. Edelman, I think his main concern for me has been playing time, but I think in the playoffs, they're going to run him out there no matter what kind of condition he's in. So I'm pretty bullish about Edelman kind of returning to form. Sanu is just that cheap play that is hard to come by this week. Someone that we know gets targets, is on the field, and I'm hoping the game log drives the ownership way down on him.
Alex, really quick, Chris. What ownership percentage on Sanu would flip you? Right now, you have him at like 20. What if it was 35?
Yeah, I mean, wow, that's a tough question. So thanks for putting the heat on me here. But so I'm looking at the cheap options.
Just hypothetically, you don't have to like run anything.
I'm looking at the alternatives here. So Corey Davis, Greg Ward, Kiki Kuti, those are like the comparable options here. And Sanu is probably Sanu and Ward have kind of the playing time down. I guess all these guys we can project for decent playing time. So I think Kuti is probably like the really contrarian option, but he gets targeted the least. Ward, he gets targeted a lot, but he doesn't do a lot with the targets. Sanu,
John Brown, maybe.
John Brown, did you say?
Yeah, he's. I'm sorry, wrong salary structure. David Moore, I was gonna say.
Oh, okay. So the one thing I'm looking at here though is that Sanu he had one game where he had 14 targets this season with New England. So the rest of the weeks have been around 5. So that would be one situation where maybe I'm taking into account that 14 target game a little bit too much. But that gives me kind of optimism that he gets targeted a decent amount when he's on the field. So I think that I feel pretty comfortable with him this week.
So Alex, I guess out of the guys that you can stack with Brady, normally I think you would err on the side from what we've talked about. It seems like you would err on the side of not pairing a running back with a quarterback for the most part. But White's correlated enough where you'd be willing to go with him plus one receiver, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think White, even without a receiver, is kind of in play just because. Okay, I have White projected for about 50 receiving yards, which would be about 20% of Tom Brady's projection. So I think that White is a guy that doesn't run the ball a lot, which kind of makes me more enthusiastic about stacking him up. I actually have him projected to be the second highest receiver on the Patriots, so that makes me think that that might be a good contrarian option, where a lot of people might set the options when they build lineups to not consider a one quarterback, one running back stack.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And again, the Vegas total here supporting New England has not moved towards Tennessee at all. So we'll see how that goes. But New England's dynasty apparently can keep rolling on, or pseudo dynasty. Let's keep going here because we're obviously talking about all the details and all the games. And hit that like button, guys. It helps us out quite a bit. Just helps us bump up the search algorithms and all that because we want to make sure people see this video. We got a game with Minnesota getting 21 implied points at New Orleans, who's favored by 8, 29 implied points for them. Alex, you mentioned Dalvin Cook earlier, who's expected to be back in the lineup, going against a tough New Orleans run defense, but he's seen a ton of work on the year. And also, we've seen New Orleans give up shockingly large production amounts. We think back to that San Francisco game a few weeks ago, where it did end up shooting out. So, Alex, what's your interest level in Minnesota, and is it the run game or the pass game that jumps out to you?
I'm pretty interested in Minnesota because I think that New Orleans, pretty average defense, a little bit better than average, but not much. Kirk Cousins has been pretty effective on the year, about 80 yards per pass. Cook is a good fantasy player because he gets targeted a lot. And I think that maybe because it's playoffs, they'll run him out there more and Alexander Madison less, which would improve his outlook. So one thing I like about Cook, too, that I kind of teased earlier, is that there's a negative correlation with the New Orleans players. So if Minnesota's up big in this game, they love to just run the ball a ton. So I think that would be a situation where Cook performs well, but the Saints don't. And because the Saints are very popular this week and the highest projected team, that gives you a little bit of leverage on the field.
Interesting. How do you feel about Cook, Brian? Do you think that he's a worthwhile play at his price point with the ownership maybe not at enough of an onerous level for you?
Yeah, I'll be over most likely unless that ownership number changes drastically. He's another guy who could go off, right? It doesn't matter. And in New Orleans too, they've been hit or miss on defense. Like sometimes, they'll shut out. Remember that week that Atlanta, New Orleans chalk week, and they shut down Atlanta, and then 2 weeks later they gave up like the most fantasy points. I can't remember who they played, but so it's possible. It's in New Orleans, but it's possible he can go off for 30.
Do you have any interest in Kirk Cousins at all, Brian? Do you think that he's a guy worth stacking, even that we do have two fairly obvious targets with Diggs and Thielen?
Yeah, I know. You'd think, right? With Diggs and Thielen and Cousins, there'd be just a huge correlation upgrade to force that in, but I'm not really getting much.
Interesting. Alex, are you also not getting much of Cousins here? Because it seems like there's, based on the 8-point total favoring New Orleans, there's a chance they're playing from behind here. So in builds without Cook, you'd be willing to go to Cousins stacked with Diggs and Thielen, or maybe Thielen and Rudolph or something weird?
My heart says yes, but now that I'm looking at these the salaries that everyone costs, it's a little bit harder because Diggs and Thielen are both pretty highly priced. So this stack altogether is one that has one of the lower team totals of the week, but one of the higher prices, which makes it pretty tough to land on. Even though I agree that the game script does set up pretty well here.
Yeah, so maybe there's some opportunity here, but and not a ton of ownership for really anybody on Minnesota's side. Everybody projected for under 19% ownership, and the high man right now, Stephon Diggs. So we'll see how that goes. And of course, if you want those ownership projections for yourself, they will be updated by our guy Eddie a little bit later on today. So go check out the osmo.com/join page right now. Use that promo code Contrary for half off your first week, or actually use the promo code 2020 2020. Get your first 20 days of the year after you sign up for just $20. That's a really good deal there to start off the year. If you want to get access to all of our tools, that's all the data, all the tools right now. Use that promo code 2020 at osmo.com/join. How about the New Orleans side here? Because New Orleans is chalky as chalky can be, and it looks like a Breeze, Kamara, Thomas stack will be the one that the field will have. But also, there are some ways to differentiate there. We just saw it down the stretch where Michael Thomas didn't get there in that last game. Obviously, week 17, a bit of a weird one, but did see Traquan Smith have some success. Jared Cook also had some there, and Kamara had some touchdowns. So, Brian, how are you handling this one here? Because based on a man who does not like chalk, it seems like you cannot love much in New Orleans.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm not going to be playing anybody this week. All the things I've been saying. It's like he's not going to have 150 lineups. I don't see how you can completely get away from Thomas. And that's with me, surprise, surprise, fading Drew Brees a decent amount here. And, I want to mention a key point that I think I'm going to do a video on in a couple of weeks when I stop being lazy. Your projections and your settings on Fantasy Crunch or whatever optimizer you use can drive your ownership of your personal ownership that you're going to put out there. So if you just get, for example, just put someone at 99 points projected, it's going to completely change all your other exposures that you have across the board. And it works the same way with groups. So because I'm fading a high owned player like Drew Brees, and I'm going to be grouping, including running players back, it's going to automatically hurt the other side, right? It's automatically going to have less Minnesota coming back, right? So that could be another reason why I'm not going to see a lot of Cousins, because if I was going to have Drew Brees, not Cousins, but Diggs or Thielen, if I was going to have Drew Brees, then there's a good chance that I would have a Diggs or Thielen coming back.
Right.
So, and this is what I said with Miles Sanders too, is even though we haven't gotten there, his ownership's low because he's questionable. He was questionable. So he's going to come up higher in my projections. That's probably going to come down because that ownership's going to go up. And again, my exposures are going to change, right? So you have to understand what's driving your projections today, right? Or this slate. And why is that happening? Kind of just keep that in mind.
Now that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot like baking where, you have to know the measurements that are going in everything. Otherwise the results are going to be weird. If you put in 10 cups of sugar as opposed to 5 cups, what a sugary item you're making, I guess, in this baking scenario. But you're, if you're doing that, it's going to change the equation quite a bit. So it's important to know what's going in so you know what the end game is. And I think we talk about that a lot with the optimizers, but another good point. So Alex, how would you handle this then? Are you willing to go with a Breeze? I know we've talked in the past, and I feel like you were not into stacking Breeze with Kamara because of how much rushing Kamara has in his equation that define his salary. But are you going to the Breeze, Kamara, Thomas stack, or do you think maybe just going Kamara and Thomas without Breeze is the move? How would you handle this?
Yeah, I think Kamara is someone that is definitely going to be in my mix this week. The price is just kind of low for someone that has the history that he has of being kind of an elite fantasy option. So I think that he'll be someone I go to. I don't think I'll want to stack Brees and Kamara because about half of Kamara's points come from running the ball. So that makes me a little bit less excited about it. But I think that Brees is someone also that projection systems might have trouble with because Taysom Hill does vulture a decent amount of action. So that is a factor that I'm considering. One that's much to the consternation of many DFS players, I'm sure. I think Michael Thomas, though, if he just goes out there and has an average day, he's probably that square that will be part of a winning lineup. So I think he's a pretty safe bet. There aren't very many spend-up options on the slate, so I think going to him makes sense.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think that we've covered a lot of the main New Orleans parts, and I guess, Brian, let's see your interest in being contrarian right now. How does Latavius Murray feel to you at about 4% ownership projected for him and a really obvious pivot to Kamara who can vulture some touchdowns?
Being contrarian doesn't mean you just take low-owned guys.
So what if I told you it's a revenge game?
Oh, well, okay. I don't know. We have to check Alex's heart meter. He just mentioned he goes by his heart. So I don't know. If Alex, his heart is into it, the revenge is there. I don't see how you pass him up. But no, I have none right now.
Okay. No, it's
No
Alex. Would
Latavius.
you have any just in case somehow Alvin Kamara has a congenital heart defect and leaves the game? Is there any world in which you have Latavius Murray?
I think that if anything, Kamara will get even more work than normal, barring some unlikely circumstance like an injury. And I don't think Latavius Murray will be that sneaky.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And I think I have to ask these questions. I'm the voice of the people. I just want to make sure we hit on it. And I guess one thing for box score watchers too, and I guess just in general as a concept, Traquan Smith, Jared Cook, Alex, are any of these guys interesting to you, given that they are ways to maybe differentiate your lineup if you were going to stack Breeze and Thomas? Like, would you go to these guys at all, or do you have any interest at all in the Smith, Ginn, Cook tier of guys?
So Traquan Smith is someone I think I'm going to completely avoid. He had the big game last week. I want to revisit this Sanu thing because I didn't really give a answer to Brian's question, to be honest. So I think that it comes down to like you need some guys to complete the salary of your lineup, and you're gonna have to choose between like a Traquan Smith, a Sanu, Davis, and I don't like Conan that much on the ownership of each of those plays because there are like 9 players in your lineup, so it's really the overall composition of the lineup I'm considering.
Well, I mean, kind of. Well, okay, let's say he's 100% owned. You're fading him. Composition doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I'm saying that going from 20 to 35%. So like the comparison here is like what is Traquan Smith's ownership versus Corey Davis?
50 you're fading him. 50 you're fading him, right?
I'm not completely sure because like
okay.
Like so let me pull up the salaries here. So we got Corey Davis.
I don't see how you can have an edge at 50% on Sanu.
I mean, like, suppose 50% of the field has Sanu.
Yeah.
And you
you don't have to take another 3,400 player. You just fade the 3,400 wide receivers.
Yeah, but one other angle of this is that like if you feel like you can get a big edge in the other 8 players in your lineup, then
I mean, let's say there was no just for argument's sake. Let's just say all the other options were 0 fantasy point projection. Yes, then 100% Sanu you take. But if they're 0.1 or more, you probably fade them, right? So if he's 50%, it's somewhere in between her. It's an extreme example, but 50% I would have to. There's no way I think I'd get to him.
Yeah, I mean the chance that Sanu has a good game is much less than 50%, as we've seen in his game log. So
and there's other players, yeah, for sure. And there's a flex. There's a flex spot. Like you don't think Taysom Hill can randomly go? I mean, if Sanu's 70% owned or something, like I think those odds are against you. But and I'm not saying that you shouldn't look at comparable players because obviously that's what you generally should be doing. That's more realistic. But there's always the reason I say that is just because at 20-some% Sanu, I think you're broaching on like how much value are we really getting there with that ownership? And now as I say this, I just picture Sanu grabbing 3 tutties. I'm getting about 20% of my money back.
Also, I had to look it up while you guys were talking, but you can't outplay Taysom Hill in the flex, right? He's still a QB.
Well, no, you can wide receiver. On some sites they have him as wide receiver, I think.
Yeah, thanks for saving me, Alex. Yeah. That's what I meant. No, I didn't mean that. I was just saying like some random player who can just get a 2 touchdown game or something.
How about you stack your Michael Thomas with your Taysom Hill at QB?
The main point I'm trying to hit on here is that like it's better to evaluate all 9 players at the same time instead of just trying to pick one player and say like are they a good or bad play, because like a lot of it is based on like the context of the slate and your lineup. So it's like you're gonna have
I do it the opposite way.
Perfect.
I do it on the individual level because, like, if you think of okay, like an easy example, this is what I talk about in my video of ownership. If you have two players who are same position, same salary, right, same projection, but they have different ownership projections, you will automatically make money by taking the lesser owned one, right? And if you take the composition of your lineup as a whole, it ignores that.
I don't like completely agree because like
Okay.
I mean
Well,
this
I'm
is
signing off right now. No.
So hypothetical. Yeah, I'm sure that some people will hit the unsubscribe button. But so suppose like you just like find a weakness in the strategy that people are using that week that while they're hitting in this one chalk player, but the other 8 players, you can find some way that you have a really unique lineup. It can actually pay off more to target that 50%. If your advantage is higher, because you're taking out more of the field when you hit.
Yeah, that's true, but you could do both, can you? Right? You could take the higher EV player and also have a total lineup construction that's higher EV. It doesn't the doing one doesn't necessarily preclude you from doing the other.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it makes sense to evaluate all 9 players at once because, like, really, you're comparing your lineup to everyone else's. So it isn't as simple as saying this player is better than that player because, like, they're the same projection and one's lower on. Because, like, if like one thing that is important is what players are going to be owned together. And like one example this week is I feel like most people game stack these days. Like I looked at one of the big tournaments and like about 50% of lineups were game stacked. But on a 4-game slate, there's like a pretty good chance that the highest scoring offense will just be in a blowout. So I think that may be undervalued. So if like suppose I say like yeah like 50% of this player is pretty high, but then like people are making this big mistake in the rest of their lineup that I can exploit. That makes me a little bit less worried about like the ownership of that particular player.
It kind of sounds like the old Reddit meme where they would ask like celebrities the question of, and this is my contribution, by the way, it shows where my head's at, but like where they're like, would you rather fight 50 regular sized ducks or one giant duck? And it seems like Brian would rather fight one giant duck, whereas Alex would rather take out, like you would assume the 50 ducks are kind of incompetent and those ducks are coming just waddling around. And I, like, I think that's sort of what
podcast. I will fuck that duck up.
But you know, it's different approaches, and I think this is an insightful and like I know it felt like it was going on there, but that was actually very insightful, and it shows you guys are both top players, and there are different paths to the same outcome. So interesting ways to think about it for the playoffs, and now you guys have some insight into how 2 guys who are very smart about this are thinking about it. Let's keep going here because we got just a few minutes left, but I want to make sure we get enough time in for Seattle at Philadelphia. Seattle, we do have a change in the running back guard there, where it is now Travis Homer, and I guess a return to the pass for Marshawn Lynch, who did get into the end zone that last game. Also saw the red zone work in that spot, but they're going against a tough Philadelphia run defense, so maybe they're not as necessary as you might think. But overall, the Seattle side seems under-owned thus far, despite the fact that Philadelphia struggled against the pass game quite a bit this year. And on Philadelphia side, Zach Ertz is actually earlier, as Brian mentioned, we do know Miles Sanders is going to be a go there, so that kind of muddies up the situation with him and Boston Scott. Zach Ertz has not been cleared to play yet, has not been cleared to practice, has a lacerated kidney and a busted up rib. Apparently the kidney is the bigger issue. Politicking to play, but it seems like he's erring on the side of not playing. So I guess the first question here, Alex, how do you handle this if we know that Ertz is, if his status is up in the air, the slate locks tomorrow, it's Saturday. What are you doing at tight end then if we don't know what Ertz is doing?
Yeah, I mean that's like probably the toughest thing on the slate. So I'm glad you asked that. Where it's like there's 2 possibilities, and your strategy is going to be vastly different based on which one happens. So if you're playing on a no late swap site like Fantasy Draft, that is going to be a huge factor in when you can get an edge. One mistake I see people make a lot is they'll just kind of trust their gut too much, that they know whether a guy will play or not. In this situation, it sounds very up in the air, and I don't think it's smart to have more confidence one way or the other. So I think that I definitely wouldn't play Ertz on fantasy draft. On the late swap site, though, one thing you could do is create a group. Or if you're single entering, you don't have to necessarily call it this, but the group I would make would be Zach Ertz and Joshua Perkins, because if Ertz plays, Perkins probably won't play very much. But if Ertz doesn't play, then Perkins will be a great value play. And both scenarios have some good value, so you want to like cover them both in your lineups, and you can always re-optimize later if you have the late swap. On Fantasy Cruncher, it makes it easy. So I'd probably make a group saying I don't want to line up with Perkins and Ertz because that would be too hard to swap off and make a good lineup. But I will try to cover both of those possibilities.
Hey, Alex, how do you late swap when you take your whole lineup construction into account?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like doing that.
It's pretty hard,
because,
right?
Yeah.
You can only do it before lock.
So one thing you can do is you can set rules in Fantasy Cruncher. So they have this feature, the My Data tab. So you can like set rules like you don't want ownership to be above a certain value or something like that. And you can kind of preserve some of the strategy that takes into account more than projection.
Oh, there you go. Thanks, Fantasy Cruncher. Another thing that they do well. Brian, do you have any insight at all about this before we talk about the actual players? How you would handle the Ertz Goddard situation if we don't know Ertz's status by the time it locks tomorrow?
Me and Martin talked about this, Alex, when we were having drinks a while ago. Papa Gates, and he asked me, because he plays a ton of fantasy draft too. He asked me what I do when questionable guys come up. But this happens in baseball a lot because the late game lineups don't come out, right? And fantasy draft kind of takes a back seat because you have more money on DraftKings and FanDuel and everything else. So I just told him I X him out. I just X him out and forget about it. And I think he kind of plays. He plays. He's a hard player too, like Alex. I think he kind of was going by. He would just take his chances sometimes. I don't know what he does now. Actually, I haven't talked to him in a couple months, but I exit out. But this week, I don't know if you can't X out Goddard. I don't think. I think you could X out Ertz and maybe cap Goddard, something like that. I haven't decided what I'm going to do on fantasy draft yet. And on Yahoo, I kind of wish that Sanders news didn't come out too, or the Ertz news, because I do late swap, and it's an edge. So the less news, especially in football playoffs on Sunday, what percentage of players are going to late swap? 5?
Yeah.
Football's nothing. If you think about it, like 3 weeks ago when DeAndre Washington came in for Josh Jacobs when he was questionable, I reswapped. I got 19%. I know Papa Gates and Chipotle, they reswapped. I'm assuming, unless they had him in early, because I know they had a bunch of them. And he got up to like 1.2%. And in the big money ones, he got up to like 1.9%. Right. And then what was he owned weeks after that? 30s, 40s, 50s. Right. It was a huge edge to late swap. And if you think about it, in those high dollar lineups in football, no one's late swapping in those. Like no one's going to. And play. First of all, you're gonna be hungover, right, on Sunday, and it's a 2-game slate, right? And people just like rolling with what they got. So I'm gonna be heavier with these with Goddard and stuff like that, and I'm gonna late swap.
Yeah, people fear the tinker because they don't want to know that they somehow screwed up what they had, but that certainly is something that can be advantage, especially when we do have 2 separate slates basically that are going on at the time if you have room to move around.
Yeah, why play? Here's my advice. Why play then? Right? Like if you think you have an edge and you're making your own projections or you're using Alex's and he updates them, use it. Right? That's why we're here. We're here to that we think we know more than everybody else, right? And so like don't use get rid of try to get rid of as many of your biases as you can, and update or if Alex updates on Sunday, which I'm sure you will, and then late swap, and then deal with it. You're not going to lose as much as me and Alex lost, or Ricky Deaky, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I think that's sort of the old school gambler mentality where it's like, I'm going to let it ride and I'm just going to let it go because you don't want to like somehow upset the universe and the butterfly effect of things. But that's a very valid point by Brian. And Eddie talks about it a lot. Fast Eddie talks about it in our NBA shows where you really should be utilizing it in NBA, especially where you have the different staggered games. But for NFL, if you have 2 separate days, if you have the money to move things around, definitely wise to do that. One thing that's underowned right now, which I think would give you the room to do that more, Seattle's pass game really looks underrepresented in our run of ownership, which can change, but the projections on them are really strong. You have really obvious guys to go to. Lockett, Metcalf, Hollister have been doing a lot of production. You also have a cheap guy if you want to take the flyer on David Moore, who I believe Brian mentioned earlier. So you have some ways to go here for the pass game. So Alex, I'll ask you, Seattle's pass game, what do you feel about them? Because it seems odd to me they'd be this low owned, knowing what we know about Philadelphia's defense, which seems like kind of general consumer knowledge.
Yeah, it's peculiar to me as well. I think Russell Wilson has been pretty great for throwing the football this year. They do tend to rush a little bit more than your average team in Seattle, which hurts his production a little bit. But I'm not as high on the matchup. But Philadelphia on a yardage basis has been about average over the course of the season. So not a huge factor, but I do like that you can pick out the guys that are getting the work here, like you mentioned, Lockett, Metcalf, Hollister. So I see a lot more potential than our ownership has him at for certain. So we'll have to wait and see tomorrow at the latest run what he's shaping out at.
Brian, how do you feel about Seattle here? Because they do fit the criteria of not being terribly highly owned for you. They have had big results. Russell Wilson's been a monster on the air. How are you feeling about their prospects heading into Seattle?
Yeah, you guessed it. I'll have over the field on a lot of these guys. Wilson, Metcalf for sure, Lockett, Moore, some Hollister, and Travis Homer apparently.
He's involved in the pass game, so he's there. Would you stack Homer with Wilson because of his pass game involvement, or is that still not? Is that a non-starter for you?
I'm getting a pretty tiny correlation from him, honestly. Okay. So they wouldn't make it in any sort of forced stacking on my end.
Got it. Okay. How about the run game overall, Brian, where you have Lynch in the mix too? And I guess you have Homer. Are you getting Lynch at all, or is it just Homer?
Barely. Lynch, Alex got him at 4% on his last ownership. Don't you feel like Marshawn Lynch back in the NFL playoffs, he's going to be like 10% owned?
Yeah, and then, it's hard to not see the brand name and just
and then you don't play him, and then he gets 4 touchdowns.
Not impossible. He got 3 goal line carries last week, or 3 red zone carries last week, and was definitely the red zone back. So it's a tough spot. Alex, your projections are not very high on Marshawn, but he did come back to 12 rushing attempts. How are you handling him? On a projection basis, it seems like you'd favor Homer, but Homer right now looks to be much higher owned.
Yeah, I don't feel very confident about either one, to be honest. I think Homer, there's a pretty strong possibility that he sees more workload to Lynch this week as they work Lynch into the passing game more. That's not really Lynch's forte by any means, so not the biggest concern in the world. But there are a lot more scenarios where I feel a lot more confident about the running backs. For instance, Buffalo, where Singletary is kind of the go-to guy, and the price difference isn't that much. So if they're splitting it down the middle here, I find it pretty easy to then go to some other guys.
That makes sense.
Can I bring up one quick point? So Homer, the books are taking money on him. They're putting out prop bets on him. That doesn't mean this guy's guaranteed to go off, but it means they think that he's going to play. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, it seems like we'll see at least some segmenting of touches there where Homer's involved, and he certainly was getting some pass game work there in a way that Lynch has never really gotten. So there are some ways that he can be involved, but whether it's worth it or not, we'll find out. The Philadelphia side, we talked a little bit about the key situation there with Ertz and Goddard, and we talked about Miles Sanders throughout the show. So I guess, Brian, Miles Sanders, if his ownership right now, we had him in our last run at 23%. How does that feel for you? And are you willing to go to Boston Scott here, where there is an actual chance that Sanders could cede carries to Scott? Because we have seen that happen over the last month.
Yeah. So like I said, this is all going to change by Sunday morning, right? But right now, first of all, I wouldn't pair them together. I'm assuming, Alex, you wouldn't do that either. even on 4-game slate. But maybe you would. I don't know. But so it's considering I'm not going to pair them together, I'm getting just a ton more Miles Sanders and just a sprinkling of Boston Scott. And this Boston Scott projection might change again come Sunday, and with the news that Sanders is really definitely going to play, because I think he just said he's going to play, right? So I guess that's not necessarily official
he
yet.
was practicing in limited fashion too, so I think he's
okay.
He's been going through the motions the way he's supposed
pretty
to.
Guaranteed. Here, let me check something too, because the books haven't put a line out on him either. So
I think the Rappaport report came out, like you said, like 10 minutes before we started, so it might still be.
Well, it was a little no line on him yet. But I like him. I like him a lot. Not going to pair him with Boston Scott. Alex is right though with Jordan Howard too at 0.1% owned. He's a legitimate running back, right? I have none of them, so I don't know why I'm even bringing him up. But if Alex says it, it makes me think for a second.
Alex, how are you feeling about Sanders here? And are you willing to go to the Scotts or Howards at the low ownership, but at a meaningful volume, or are you just willing to get a little bit more than them in the chance that things break a certain way? Because Philly has shown a penchant to ride the hot hand.
So I think there's a lot of uncertainty here because Howard, last week they announced he would be the emergency running back. So we knew he wasn't going to play. So the fact that he didn't play didn't really indicate what his role would be going forward. And I think that the most likely thing to happen this week is Howard is in the mix and maybe even getting a good workload. So for that reason, I'm completely off of Boston Scott. I think it's just too risky that he will hardly be in the game. And I think that that could siphon usage away from Sanders as well, who hasn't seen quite the workhorse usage in the past few weeks, but he was injured last game, so we didn't really get a good sample in that game. So I think this might be a situation where I don't really have any of these guys just because there's so much in flux here, and I don't think Sanders is well priced to begin with.
Do you see any potential for the pass game with Wentz then, if you are going to move away from the run game, which should have some ownership on it, at least for Sanders?
100%. I mean, regardless of whether Ertz plays or not, the tight ends in this game are going to be by far the best plays of the slate. If Ertz is out, then Goddard will be the best play by far, as far as not taking ownership into account. Perkins will also be a great play. He did have a big game week 17, so we saw that potential realized, so I don't think he'll be sneaky at all. But if Ertz plays, I think he'll probably be the best projected tight end of the week. So I'm pretty heavy on the tight ends in this situation. We might have to swap to get the best situation, but those would be the guys I'm looking to.
Nobody at wide receiver. I know you talked about Ward a little bit earlier, and his price is up, but I think you said he doesn't do a ton. But Ward, Deontay Burnett, who was targeted a lot in a short amount of routes run. I think he ran 11 routes, but got 4 targets in that span in week 17. Robert Davis is in the mix. Are any of these guys at all of interest to you, or is it just mostly an avoid for the actual wide receiver core?
Robert Davis is someone I'd be interested in just because he got more playing time than some of the other guys. He's super, super cheap, so he could be a choice between him and Kuti if you're really trying to complete your lineup and you have very little money. Arcega Whiteside is someone that didn't really play that much in week 17, so I would avoid him. Ward, he got the price bump to beyond where I'm willing to spend, but maybe on Yahoo and FanDuel where he's cheap.
Brian, how do you feel about the wide receivers? Do any of these guys jump out to you as being worthwhile, given that it is pretty much a dumpster fire of a position, but Seattle does give up a lot of passing yards offense-wise?
Just Ward. None of the other guys are doing anything for me.
All right. So I don't know if we need to do contrarian QB in such of the week, but I guess let's just say, all right, let's change the game for this week only. If you had your life on the line and you had to also beat those 50 ducks and the one big duck in a situation in the lineup, Brian, who would be the team stack that you feel like is the one that you would want to go to above all?
Let me look. Oh God. Probably Watson, Hopkins.
Okay. Interesting. And then would you run it back with a Buffalo guy?
It depends. Yeah, but if I did, it'd be either Beasley or Brown.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Alex, how about you? If you had one stack for your life, who would it be?
Based on our ownership now, I think that the Seattle stack would make a lot of sense. But on certain sites, Tennessee, pretty much everywhere but DraftKings, Tennessee is just like far and away the 8th highest owned, and I think their potential isn't that much lower than the other team. So I think they could be a great contrarian stack.
Yeah, I think the Seattle one's the obvious one that jumps out, but we talked about that, and I think we all kind of assume that it's going to come up a little bit ownership-wise. So I'll go to Buffalo. Right now, they're high-owned, but I got to support Josh Allen in his one playoff start, and I would like to believe he's just been rope-a-doping people all year long with his decreased completion percentage and low yards per attempt. He's still throwing deep, still throwing for 9.4 air yards per attempt when he's trying to throw it. So this could be the spot. I don't know. I want to believe in you, Josh.
Does Brady have another week left in him?
Look, I think this is when he really was born to shine. Playoff Josh Allen. We're building towards the Lamar Josh Allen showdown the world has waited for. White Lamar versus regular Lamar. I think we're all ready for it. Fade of the week, I guess. Who would it be for you, Brian?
Let's see here. Probably. Wow, this ownership percentage is like where you have TJ Yeldon at 50%. Do I have the wrong week here? All of a sudden popped up. Yeah, I got the wrong week going here. Maybe Henry. Okay. I think that ownership's going to go up, and I think I'm going to end up with very little or none of them. Which is scary.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your fade of the week?
Based on our ownership now, I think I would fade Sony Michele. Yeah. So if let's see. He's a little bit cheap, so that could be a reason why you'd land on him, but I much prefer White as far as projection. And then as far as value, he does kind of fit a price range that's hard to get to, but I'm confident with some of the cheap wide receivers like Hute, like Sanu and Davis. So I think I'll be spending up more at running back.
And similarly for me, I think my fade would be Corey Davis, who I think just seems a little highly owned. People maybe box score watching that one, but because he has gone off in 2 games against New England over the last 2 years, but it's a different team. This is AJ Brown's team now. I don't see how he gets 125 yards and a TD this year. But yeah, I don't think the Corey Davis thing is for me. All right, Brian, here it is. Your chance to plug whatever you want because we appreciate you coming on as a guest yet again. So plug whatever you want to YouTube or anything in your life. If you want to plug your graphs proving your bankroll, you can do that too.
I don't have much to plug. Yeah, Twitter is Brian Hooper __. And you can find my YouTube channel. Just type in my screen name Brick75 or my real name Brian Hooper. I think it's the first thing that pops up.
All right. And Alex, anything you want to hit on before we call it quits?
I think thanks, Brian, of course. It's always a pleasure. Definitely put me to the test more. We had some interesting discussions here. Maybe too interesting for a free show, but hopefully Martin and Chipotle weren't watching this one. Anyway, one thing, we do have a really sweet promo going on right now, this 2020 promo code. It's only $20 for a 20-day all-access membership, so that's basically like 2 weeks free since it's about $20 per week. I think it's like 16. So it's a pretty big discount for the New Year celebration here. And thanks, Fantasy Draft, for all the wings. I mean, you just win more money on Fantasy Draft because they have more money in the prize pool of what people are putting in. So your chances are going to be a lot better playing on that side.
Oh, can I promote the Spagcast? The
Untitled Chris Spags podcast. I don't usually plug that as much, but yes, that's my plug. Go check out my pin tweet. Subscribe to my podcast. New episodes every Saturday. Brian Hooper, the biggest fan, one of our celebrity listeners who enjoys it. But no, go check that out and use that promo code for real. That is one of the better deals we have. And actually, if you use that promo code, I would guess like later today, you can get the next 3 weeks of the playoffs as part of that deal because we're going to have the content going up, all the data going up in advance. So it's a good time to try out the $20 for 20 days promo code with the promo code 2020 at awesemo.com/join right now. We appreciate all you guys sticking with us all season long. We're going to continue to have these shows down the stretch run of the playoffs. So subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when we go live. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Brian, for coming on. We'll see you guys all again soon. Good luck.